Hello Year 8, this is Miss Burnett and I'm bringing you this week's lessons on the Tempest. I hope you really enjoyed the first 3 lessons last week with Mrs Calloway, her fabulous lessons. And this week with me we'll be carrying on as you already have been. So you'll be having 3 recorded lessons on the Tempest to work through this week. You will also have your 2 creative writing or grammar lessons at some point this week, and you will also be checking in with your teacher, your English teacher, twice this week for 20 minutes each time to clarify any questions or concerns or comments you might have on the learning for this week. So make sure, first of all, that you have your audio switched on. Hopefully you can hear me nice and clearly. If you are working and trying to keep your school routines at home, then well done. If you are, you might like to write the date and title at the top of your piece of paper for today. The title is The Tempest and the date obviously is whatever date you are looking at this lesson. There are 3 lessons within this PowerPoint, so what I want you to do is keep going as you were last week and work your way through. Obviously some of you might be really good and following your school routine. If you are, fantastic. But if you're not, then you can come back to these lessons at any time across the week and go through at your own leisure, at your own pace, and pause wherever you'd like to. So you need obviously your pen and paper to write on. You won't need your booklet for lesson 1 with me. You won't need your booklet for this lesson, but you will do for the second one and the third one. And hopefully you are ready to go. Okay, so first of all, we need to go through some key vocabulary, and our play obviously is called The Tempest. So each of these images shows a tempest. Well, my question then is, what is a tempest? So there's 2 ideas here, 2 word classes we need to think about. We need to think about the noun, tempest. So what is a tempest? It's a thing, it's a noun. But also tempestuous, that's an adjective. So that describes something. So if someone is tempestuous, what might that mean? So a tempest is a violent storm. That is simply what a tempest is. So which of these pictures shows a tempest? So A, we've got a bit of a boat there that's been cast ashore, perhaps in some kind of storm. We've got, I believe that's Tom Hanks, perhaps in Castaway, on a beach there, not looking very happy. And then at the bottom there, we've got some pretty violent weather. So which one of these images shows a tempest? Have a think. Okay, obviously it's C. So A and B, they are showing perhaps a tempest that has already occurred. But C is the answer because that is the storm happening. Okay, that is the tempest. We're looking there at a tempest. We're looking at a storm. Okay. And then we've got the adjective tempestuous. So something that is tempestuous, or a person that is tempestuous, is full of strong emotions. So which of these images shows a tempestuous person? Now you might have more than one answer for this, but my answer is A. So these are all characters from the Tempest. This is a character called Caliban, and we will see in the play that Caliban is an extremely tempestuous person. He is full of strong emotions and feelings. Before we start watching and reading the play, it's really useful to have a quick rundown of the characters we're going to meet in each scene. There are a lot of characters in The Tempest, as there always is in a Shakespeare play, but when you get used to the play, once you've read through the first few scenes, you will pick up the characters, I promise you, so don't panic about this. So, first of all, we meet Alonso. Alonso is the King of Naples. We then meet Sebastian, and Sebastian is Alonso's brother, so he is the Prince of Naples. So we also meet Antonio. Now Antonio is the brother of a character we haven't met yet called Prospero, and he is the Duke of Milan. Now it says here that Antonio is the usurping brother of Prospero. If someone usurps someone else, that means they take over their role. So in history you might have read or learned about a king or a potential king usurping another king. That means they've taken over the throne by force. So what Antonio has done is he has usurped his brother's role. So Antonio has stolen the title of Duke of Milan from his brother Prospero. More on that later. And then the final main character we meet in Act 1, Scene 1 is Gonzalo. And he is the old counsellor to the king. He's a very interesting character, Gonzalo, but he offers counsel and advice to King Alonso. But he actually also previously knew Prospero, so the character we haven't yet met. So he's an interesting one, Gonzalo, to keep an eye on. So, in Act 1, Scene 1, then we meet the master, so in charge of the ship. We see the bosun, that's how you say that, bosun, who is in charge of navigating and steering the ship. Alonso, the King of Naples, Antonio, Prospero's usurping brother, Gonzalo, an old wise counsellor to the king, and Sebastian, who is Alonso's brother. We also know, because it says so in the stage direction, so Shakespeare makes a point of telling us this, that the setting is in the middle of a tempestuous noise of thunder and lightning. So it's really dramatic opening to a play, and we'll think a bit about the setting and the staging of this on the next slide. Firstly though, I would like you to either think to yourself or discuss with someone else in the room, discuss with your pet, what might each character feel about the storm. So before you pause the slide, think about the roles each character plays on the ship. So for instance, the master and bosun, they are in charge of navigating this ship through a horrendous tempest, a storm of thunder and lightning. So what might they be worried about in this storm? How might they be feeling about that? And then also think about perhaps Alonso, the king. How might he be feeling in a storm that's incredibly dangerous, particularly when you consider what the ships were like at this time in Elizabethan times. Think back to Mrs. Calloway's lessons on that if you want to. Okay, so pause the slide there and have a think about those questions. Okay then, so to start with the master and bosun, these characters have experience of storms, which is obviously a good thing, and they will want to keep the ship safe and save the lives of everyone on board. So remember remember the passengers that these characters are carrying on this ship. We've got a king, for instance, so it's really important that they can steer the ship through the tempest, through the storm, and make it out alive. So that's a lot of pressure on them, but they do have experience of this type of weather, so that is a good thing. Alonso, as a king, he will probably want to save his own life. That's probably going to be the most important thing to him because of his role, because of how important he is in society and in Naples. He'll want to ensure that he comes out of this alive and well. Antonio. Antonio will also want to save his life. He may be scared, but he also may be rude and cruel to the other people on the ship. Notice that we know that Antonio is Prospero's usurping brother. So as an audience member and readers, we need to remember that, because we will then have clues as to what type of person Antonio might be. So look out for his lines later on and see whether we can see any rudeness or potential cruelty in anything he is saying. Okay, so Gonzalo. As a counsellor to the king, Gonzalo will probably want to ensure the safety of Alonso. Because he is a counsellor, being supportive to the king's needs and wants is his most important role, really. So he will want to make sure that the king is absolutely safe in this storm. And then Sebastian, he will want to save his own life and that of his father. So here we've got a collection of characters who will be panicking, really, in this storm. And it's down to the master and bosun to get them through this storm. When it comes to this play, the theme of class and social standing is actually really important. So as we read through the play, do think about this idea that the master and bosun are socially a bit lower down the pecking order than the King of Naples. However, in this moment, in this storm, on this ship, Alonso's safety lies with the master and bosun. These men of a lower social class. The power lies really with them. So it's quite interesting to think about power and status from the start of the play, if you can. So, very exciting. We're going to start watching the opening scene of this play. Now, obviously, if we were in school, you'd be following along in the script, and we'd read as a class and take apart the parts of the script, and we'd all play roles. Obviously, where you're at home, we can't do it like that. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to show you a version of the play that you can watch along. After all, this is Shakespeare, and it's a drama, it's a play. Plays are meant to be watched rather than read, really. So in a way, you're watching this as Shakespeare's audience and Shakespeare himself would have intended you to watch it as a piece of drama. So we are thrown in as an audience straight into the action, into a highly dramatic scene. There is a real sense of danger and a worry that the characters will drown. There is confusion on this ship, and not all of the characters know at this point what's happening. So if you're watching this at home and thinking, I really don't know what's going on, that's normal, don't worry. We are meant to feel that way. Shakespeare has deliberately set up this storm, this tempest, as the opening scene, deliberately to confuse us and to make us feel a bit uneasy. So if you're feeling that way, then that is exactly what the writer intended. So, just before we watch it, and I'll give you a quick synopsis of what we're about to see to help you understand it. This is a drama, so it is really useful to think about the different ways this has been portrayed in the past. Sometimes on stage, some directors opt for a really bare stage, and this is what Shakespeare would have had. He would have had quite an empty stage for this, without too much setting, without too much, obviously lighting didn't have that type of technology in Shakespeare's time. It would have been very bare, and it would have been reliant on the actors and their portrayal of how they were feeling as characters to get that across to the audience. So sometimes I've seen this done with an illusion of a ship kind of broadcast, kind of lit up onto the back of the stage in a modern production. Sometimes directors use sound to really amp up the sound of the storm. And if we were in class, sometimes I do what we call a soundscape, where we go across the room and make noises to create the drama of the storm. And sometimes there are really elaborate pieces of setting, huge ships that are created. The version we're going to watch is a stage production with a piece of shipping that the actors are standing on, and there is some music in the background to really bring out the sound and the noise that you would hear in a storm like this. So it's really important to remember that the version that we're watching is not the only version of the play that's been made, and there are different ways of dramatising these scenes. So as we see and we drop into this storm onto the ship in the middle of this piece of action, the storm rages, the master of the ship, his bosun and other sailors are trying to control the ship whilst the noblemen get in their way. So that's, for instance, Alonso, Antonio, Sebastian, Gonzalo. They are all getting in the way of really the sailors trying to do their jobs. The bosun tells them, "What care these roarers for the name of the king? To cabins, silence, trouble us not. It seems the ship is about to sink, and the sailors yell, 'Mercy on us, we split, we split.'" So we go into a extremely chaotic scene. So to watch this version of the play, we have uploaded an adaptation, a version of this, a film version of this, to Teams for you. So if you click on the link on this slide now, it should take you to a kind of a website, a platform that looks a bit like this screenshot here. So what you need to do is click on that link, on this link, and then watch the play from the very beginning until around 4:38, and that will take you to the next scene, and you'll know where to stop because the whole mood changes. It's much quieter, and we see new characters. So only watch, please, from the very beginning to 4:38. Once you've done that, if you want to see how how a film has actually adapted this play for film, and you want to see how they've done this opening, then you could look at this YouTube clip. It is on YouTube, I'm afraid, and I'm very aware that not all of us, perhaps those of us in school, can't look at this, but that's fine. This is only optional. It's the 2010 film version, and I'd recommend only watching the first 3 minutes. You will get the idea, and you'll see the way that other directors adapt this play for different audiences and for different mediums as well. Okay, so I hope you enjoy. So hopefully you were able to watch that part of the play and follow the action there. It's an incredibly dramatic and exciting opening to a play, and I thought what would be useful is to just go over very briefly what just happened. So there is complete chaos on stage during the final part of this scene. In what they believe are their final moments, all the characters behave in very different ways. So we're seeing different individuals, different social classes, standings in society, different beliefs. They are all basically turning to what they think will help them in what they think is their last moments on earth. So some call on God's mercy in prayer. So Alonso, Sebastian and Gonzalo do this. We'll talk about some of those key quotes in a second. Others say farewell to each other. So we see other mariners in the sea and we hear voices in the script off stage bidding farewell to one another because they think that this is the end for them. So it's very dramatic and very exciting. Okay, so let's pick apart this scene slightly and look at some of the key quotes from the script and look at what some of these characters are saying in this moment of total chaos. So first of all, we've got Gonzalo, and he says 2 key things. So, good, yet remember whom thou hast aboard, and the king and prince at prayers, let's assist them, for our case is as theirs. So how do these quotations show that Gonzalo, the king's counsellor, wants to ensure the safety of King Alonso? So pause the slide here, have a think. Again, you might want to talk to someone else in the room with you, and then on the next slide we will talk through some ideas. So one of the key moments in Act 1, Scene 1 of the play is during the storm, the boatswain is constantly reminding Gonzalo of humanity's weakness, really in the face of nature's violence. But obviously Gonzalo is sort of saying, well, good, yes, that's true, that nature is terrifying and we can't control it, yet remember whom thou hast aboard. So remember who you are carrying in this ship. He then says, the king and prince are at prayers, let's assist them, for our case is theirs. So what this means, and let's take the first quote first of all, is that Gonzalo is saying that you must remember the king is on this ship. He wants to remind the boatswain that if anything happens to the king, he will be punished. So he's almost threatening him in a way and sort of saying, look, do your best to get us out of this storm, otherwise you're going to pay for this, and perhaps so will I. So he's sort of saying here, and he's showing his devotion to the king by reminding the boatswain, the man who's already probably under a lot of strain at this point, that if he doesn't pull through with this, if he doesn't successfully get the ship through the storm, he might be punished for whatever happens next. Taking that second quote there, the king and prince at prayers, let's assist them, for our case is theirs. What he's saying there is that he wants him to join the king in prayer to help them get to safety. So it's almost like the more people that pray together for the same cause, the more likely it will be that God will take pity on us, on them, and get them through the storm. I would also say, if we're analysing that quote, that we see perhaps a more, not selfish, that's too strong a word, but a Gonzalo who is also looking out for himself here, looking out for his own life, saying, look, let's assist them in prayer, because our case, our survival in this ship, is really as important as theirs. And if we pray as well, then hopefully it means we'll get through this problem, we'll get through this storm as well as they will. So we also hear quite loudly from Antonio. So this is Prospero's brother, the man who usurped the dukedom, the throne of Milan. So already we have a hint that he's not a particularly nice man. And Antonio says to the boatswain, so the captain of the ship, "Hang her, hang you horse and insolent noisemaker. We are less afraid to be drowned than thou art." And then also he says at the very end, "Let's all sink with the king." So very dramatic there from Antonio. So how do these quotations show that Antonio may be scared? Do they show that he is rude and cruel to the other people on the ship? Okay, so again, pause the slide here, have a think to yourself, perhaps make a note, a written note of this. Perhaps you might want to speak to someone else in the room. And then again, we'll talk through the answers on the next slide. Okay, so as you can tell from the punctuation in that first quote, we've got lots of commas. We've got a exclamation mark, 2 exclamation marks actually there, and a lot of very rude and argumentative language. So Antonio is speaking with a lot of emotion here. And this to me and to a lot of audience members would suggest that this is showing his uncontrollable fear and anger at this storm. The use of language that he is utilising here and showing here is very, very insulting, particularly when this is directed towards the captain of the ship, the boatswain, who is responsible for their survival. You would think that a passenger on that ship would do whatever they could to help the captain, help the boatswain, get them to safety. Antonio does not feel that way. And when the boatswain says to Antonio and the other nobles on the ship, "Go below decks where you'll be safe and I will deal with this, I will get us through the storm," Antonio cannot stand this class, social standing kind of disruption. And what this does, his use of violent language and rude language does, coupled with Gonzalo's comment about remembering who's on board the ship, what that does is it reminds the boatswain, but it also reminds us and makes the audience feel that despite this tempest, despite being within a massive storm that is nearly going to cause complete destruction and death to the passengers on board, despite all of that, social standing and respect, or what we think should be levels of respect, is more important than everything else. So even in this moment of chaos, social class, social standing and manners are still more important to them than anything else. So it doesn't matter that the boatswain is the captain of the ship, the one with all the knowledge and understanding of the weather and storms at sea, sailing, that doesn't matter. What annoys Antonio is that the boatswain will speak to him in a slightly rude manner, but to guarantee his safety, that annoyance for him is more important than the fact that this man could save his life. So it's really very interesting to think this about Antonio, and we already get this sense that Antonio is a nasty character and that he has no respect for anyone perhaps knowing more than him. What he values most is power and status. This "let's all sink with the king" quote is an interesting one as well. I think this shows quite a defeatist attitude, quite a dramatic attitude, that Antonio would rather wait for death with the king and admit that fate than do anything to help, to do anything useful. So although he has this dukedom, he has this power, he doesn't really have any of the what we might call personality traits to back this power up, to make him worthy of that role, if we're looking at those kind of stereotypical roles of people in power at this time. Yes. Okay, so well done Year 8. We are nearly at the end of this lesson, this first one of the week. So your final task is to think about the named characters that we have met in Act 1, Scene 1. So at the end of the scene, all of these characters are washed ashore. So they survive. So for each character, I would like you to write down 2 things. So 1, a key fact you have learned about them. And number 2, create a piece of speech that might say now how they have, create a piece of speech that they might say now they have been washed ashore. So number 1, a key fact about that character, and number 2, a piece of speech they might say now they have been washed ashore. So for example, Antonio, so number 1, the key fact is that he is Prospero's usurping brother and he is a rude character that we clearly cannot trust or like. So, and number 2, my piece of speech, we survived by the grace of God. No thanks to that bosun. So what I've done there is I've got into the kind of the role of the character, and I've thought, right, what would he say now he survived? And I think Antonio would be pretty thankless, really, and pretty ungrateful for the heroic actions of the mariners on that ship, and would probably just think for what his next goal is, what his next kind of thing on his list to do is. So that is your final task. On the slide after this, there is a stretch and challenge for anyone who would like to push themselves a bit further. I'm expecting many of us to want to do that. Your teachers may want this in from you to mark, but they may not. They will let you know in their live lesson with you this week. Okay, so hopefully you are here because you want to be challenged a bit more with this lesson, which is fab. So if you do, there are a few thematic points and ideas I want you to consider. And this is important because it runs all the way through the play. The Tempest, and any Shakespeare play really, is always rich, full of imagery and bigger questions that we can consider as readers and as an audience. So one of these key things in the play is the dichotomy, the contrast and relationship between humans and nature. So, for instance, the bosun raises a theme that reoccurs, and it's this relationship between humans and nature, and he says, if you command these elements to silence, use your authority. So when he's being criticised by the nobleman on the ship in the Tempest, in the storm, for not steering them, according to them, properly, not helping them be more safe, he says, look, hold on, if you're the king, if you're the one with the divine power from God, if you're the ones with all the control, then by all means, use your command to silence the weather, silence the storm. Go on, use your authority. What he does there is actually quite brave because he challenges their authority, and he actually also challenges the divine right of kings, the divine kind of placement that puts a monarch on a throne, puts a leader in a position of power. He questions this and doubts this, which is very brave of him. So, for one of my stretch and challenge points then for you is, which of these statements do you agree with? We've got 1, nature is humanity's opponent and must be controlled, or nature is humanity's friend and should be respected. So what do you think? What I want you to do, if you are looking at this, is to perhaps divide your piece of paper in front of you into 2 and think about arguments of both sides, or you could pick the one you agree with most and write perhaps a paragraph or a few lines about that. Or what you could do, if you've got some people in the house around you that might want to talk about this with you, you could have a verbal debate and perhaps set up your 2 argument sides, and perhaps if there's 2 of you in the room, you could perhaps take one side each and debate amongst each other. Enjoying Shakespeare is really about discussion and about exploration. So the more of this you think about, the more you think of this thematically in terms of these bigger ideas, the better you will understand the play, and the more exciting and interesting it will be as well for your reading of the play. So I hope you enjoy that. The other stretch and challenge task that I'm going to set you, just as an optional task, is to think about the idea of fate and free will. This is another big issue and big theme that permeates the play. This idea of destiny, Gonzalo calls it the rope of destiny that they might cling to. He's referring to bosun's potential punishment of being hanged when they return to shore. He uses that as a way of helping him through the storm, thinking about destiny helping them. And we'll see this more at play throughout the text, throughout the play, this idea of fate and calling on higher spirits, higher beings for help. So, my second stretch and challenge question is this. How much control do you think the characters have over their lives at this point in the play? So to help you with this, you might want to think about what forces are shaping their actions, and think about what most affects what they are doing and saying. So you might here want to think about the storm. So who has conjured the storm? Little clue there for later on in the play. Who or what has made this tempest form? Is it the gods above them? Is it someone else perhaps? Hint, hint. You also might want to think here about the power play between these characters, the social class differences between the nobleman, so the king and his men, and the boatswain and the mariners on the ship. There is a difference between them. So does that make a difference? Does that limit how much control they have over their lives, or doesn't it? So what do you think about that? So, well done for making it to the end of this lesson. Again, these tasks on the blue slides are optional, but they are really nice ways to challenge your thinking a bit more about this play. I'm not sure about you, but when I look at that photoshopped image of Shakespeare, I always think it's moving. I think because I'm so used to seeing the original, that the winking version just looks a bit odd. I keep thinking it's winking at me, which is very, very strange. Anyway, but that is the end of this first lesson. So again, if you have any questions about any of this, please ask your teachers. They'll be more than happy to help you with this in their live sessions, and I'm sure you can also email them if you have any queries as well. So, well done. Hello Year 8, this is Miss Burnett, again here for your second lesson on the Tempest this week. So that's lesson 5 in total now on the Tempest. So again, make sure you've got your audio switched on. The title for today would be Prospero and Miranda. You'll need your pen and paper obviously for today. You will need your booklet in front of you today, and I'll tell you exactly when you need to get that in front of you. And yes, so I hope you enjoy today's lesson. We are looking really at 2 new characters today, as you may have guessed from the title, Prospero and Miranda. Okay, so you may remember from Year 7 that we looked at a play called A Midsummer Night's Dream, also by Shakespeare, and we studied 2 characters as part of that, and these characters I'm thinking of for this moment are Hermia and Aegeus. So 2 questions for you really. You can either discuss this with perhaps someone in the room with you, or perhaps write it down on paper. Number 1, what was the relationship between Hermia and Aegeus? So what was the relationship between the 2 of them? And number 2, what had Hermia done to upset Aegeus? And then your extension question is, how was the disagreement resolved? Okay, so think about the relationship between Hermia and Aegeus, and what had Hermia done to upset Aegeus? So pause the slide here. You may like to look at that image on the slide to help you. Look at how they're standing, look at the age between them, the difference between them. That might help you. So, well done if you remembered exactly who Hermia and Aegeus were. So in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Hermia is Aegeus' daughter. Hermia upset her father Aegeus because she wanted to marry a man called Lysander. Aegeus did not approve of this marriage, and Aegeus wanted Hermia to marry a man called Demetrius. Hermia was so upset, she actually ended up running away with Lysander, so she ran away with the man she wanted to marry. By the end of the play, however, because of the love potion, Demetrius says that his love for Hermia melted as the snow, and he likes Helena instead. So that allows Hermia then to marry the man she wanted to in the first place, Lysander. So your answer to question 1 is that Hermia and Aegeus are father and daughter, get that right, father and daughter, and Hermia upsets Aegeus because she wants to marry someone he doesn't approve of, and she runs away to marry that man, who is obviously Lysander. So well done if you remembered that, because yet again with another Shakespeare play we have lots of characters, lots of names to remember, but they will become easier in time. So, why have I asked you this question about A Midsummer Night's Dream? Why have I asked you to cast your minds back to Year 7? Well, in The Tempest, we're going to meet another father and daughter. The father here is Prospero, and the daughter is Miranda. So, just for your own knowledge, these 2 images are photos taken from a Globe production. So, a production of The Tempest that was performed at the Globe Theatre in London, the home of Shakespeare, and this was recorded and photographed for schools to use and for people to watch at home. So that backdrop there for these actors, that's actually the Globe Theatre. So if any of you have been there before, you might recognise that backdrop there. So Prospero, father, and his daughter Miranda. So these are the next two characters we're going to be following and reading about. Okay, so last lesson we looked at the action on the boat and the despair on the boat while it was being torn apart by the tempest, by the storm that was erupting in the sea. So while that's happening, Miranda has been watching from the shore and she's been seeing this whole drama unfold in the sea, and she's worried about what happened to those on board. So let's watch this next part of the play. So this is Act 1, Scene 2. And we're going to watch a piece of speech between Miranda and Prospero. Now this is only a short piece of the play. We will watch a bit more later on, but for this we're just going to pause it after 1 minute. So I want you to start it at 4 minutes 38 and then only watch 1 minute and stop at 5 minutes 38. So just a short clip, this one, and then we'll talk about these two characters afterwards. Now there was a lot of emotion in that clip from Miranda, and I'd like you now we'll do it this way, I'd like you on your piece of paper to write down some key adjectives or key phrases that you would use to describe Miranda. So think back to what you've just watched, what she was saying, how she was saying it. What words would you use to describe Miranda? So I'm just going to give you one. Oh, no, that was all of them. I'm not going to give you any. I'll give you about sort of 10 seconds. You can pause the slide if you want to take longer on this, but come up with some key words and then we'll discuss them. Okay, right, here we go, magic. So she's concerned, she's worried, she's kind, emotional, perhaps arguably a bit dramatic. When we look at her speech in a bit more detail in a second, you'll see what she's actually saying, the words she's using, but she's overcome with emotion. I think you can see that by the way the actress portrayed her in that clip just now, that she is overcome with sadness and pain, and she wishes she could do something to stop this storm and to stop what seems like inevitable death that's going to happen in the storm with the ship. So Miranda is very unlike the characters we've actually seen so far in this play. She has much more sympathy and much more concern for those around her and wants to do what she can really to help. So well done if you've got any of those words on your list. Obviously I'm sure you had other ones, so well done on those. Okay, so before we move on, it's always important with Shakespeare, like it is with any text really, to really understand what's going on in the play, what's actually happening. So, what I'd like you to do is answer these three questions in front of you. So, number one, who has made the storm? So, who has created the tempest? Number two, what has upset Miranda? And number three, what does Prospero tell Miranda? Okay, so to help you with this, it's always easier to have a look at a text version of the play. So what I've done is I've pasted this extract for you to use to help you with this. All of the answers to those questions are in this extract on the left-hand side. And I've also underlined a few phrases that you could use to help you with this. So for instance, number one, who has made the storm? Look at the top, the very first lines of this extract. So again, try to answer these in full sentences in your books. On the next slide, there are some answers. Try not to look at them straight away though. Try and work these out for yourself first of all, and then use that on the next slide to help you check your answers, and you can tick them if you want to, or fill any in that you didn't already have. Number one, who has made the storm? Obviously, I'm sure we know this, Prospero has made the storm, and Miranda says to him, if by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar. So if by your art, so if this is by your doing, so the art there is the doing, it's his job, it was his making that he made this storm. Number two, what has upset Miranda? Well, Miranda's upset because she thinks the people on the ship have drowned. Poor souls, they perished, she says, they died in this storm. Number three, what does Prospero tell Miranda? Prospero tells Miranda that everyone on board the ship is safe, and he says, "There's no harm done." Obviously, Miranda might question that, and so would we as the audience. But Prospero says that no harm has come to them, no harm has been done. So we learn from this, it's a really important part of the play, that Prospero has some powers of some kind. We don't know where they come from at this stage, but they are his, and it is his doing, this storm. He has created this tempest, this crazy chaotic weather that caught the ship in a storm. So why did he do that? Well, we don't know at the moment. We need to read on and watch on and see what happens. Right, so in the next passage in the play, Prospero begins to tell Miranda of their past, and he says, "Sit down, for thou must now know, Father." So you must now know what's happened to us and what happened in the recent years that you no longer remember. Because she was very young when she left Milan, extremely young. She's only about 3, so she doesn't remember too much of her life before living on the island, but she knows something isn't right, and Prospero decides finally that she needs to know what's happened to them both. So before you start watching the next part of the play, I'd like you to draw up a table that looks a bit like this one. So 2 columns, one with the title Miranda and the other side with a caption Prospero. Now, the ultimate aim of this is that once you've watched the next part of the play, you will have a list for each character of things you know about them, facts you find out about Miranda and facts you find out about Prospero. So while you watch, you might like to start filling this in as you go. That would be perhaps a better thing to do in terms of time, but if you'd like to, you can just watch it first and then fill it in after you've seen the scene. Okay, so after you've watched that clip. Okay, so go to the link on the side of that table there and watch the play from 5 minutes 38 to 8 minutes 18. Okay, so you've watched the clip of the play, which I hope you enjoyed. There was a lot of information given to us between Prospero and Miranda. We learned a lot there about their 2 personalities and the things that have happened to them over the last few years. The 12 years he tells us, Prospero tells the audience and Miranda that it was 12 years since they had to leave, since they were kind of removed from Milan. So, using what you've just watched and using the quotes on this slide, I would now like you to fill in that table. So for instance, if we're looking at the beginning of that clip, and I've taken a few quotes there in the purple box at the top there, that's from the opening of that clip, we see this in the speech. So Miranda says, "If by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar." So she says, you know, "Father, if you've done this, why have you done this?" And then she says later on, "The poor souls, they perished." And then Prospero says in return, "There's no harm done." So if I'm taking that now and putting it into my table, under Miranda's name, I'm writing that Miranda cares for others. Okay, she says, "Poor souls, they perished." So those poor people, they've died on that ship. So she cares for other people, clearly. We also know from this, obviously, that Miranda is Prospero's daughter, because she says at the start of this extract, "If by your art, my dearest father," my dearest father. So we know that she is Prospero's daughter, that's her father. When it comes on to Prospero, we learn that Prospero made the storm. He has magical powers of some kind, because Miranda says, "Was it by your art, father, that you put the wild waters in this roar?" So we know he has powers. We also know that Prospero tells Miranda that everyone on board the ship is safe. So when he says there's no harm done. Okay, so from that we can also infer that he wants Miranda to be happy. He wants her to be at peace, because he takes the trouble to say that there's been no harm done. So he cares about her like she cares about him, and like she cares about the people on that ship. Okay, so what I want you to do in summary is to think about the film you've just watched, the clip you've just watched, and then I want you to write down everything you learn about these 2 characters, and you can use the quotes on this slide as well to help you with that. So Prospero, for instance, says, "I have done nothing but in care of thee." So in care of you. So what does that mean? In the green box we've got, "Thou wast not out 3 years old." And Miranda says, "Had I not 4 or 5 women that once tended to me?" Okay, so think about that and what we learn about these characters from that comment. So what kind of world have they left behind, basically? How would Miranda be living if she had 4 or 5 women looking after her? What does that mean about the life they used to have? And then the blue box, 12 years since, Miranda, thy father was the Duke of Milan, and thou his only heir, and princess no worse issued. So what do we learn there about Prospero? Okay, so that is now down to you to do that independently, and then we'll move on to the next part of the play in just a second. So you might want to pause the lesson here and we'll fill in that table you've made and then move on. Right then, so answers, very quickly, let's go through some answers. So Miranda, we learn that she cares for others. We know she's the daughter of Prospero. We know that she's able to feel empathy for others. So think here about the difference between sympathy and empathy. So sympathy is when you feel sorry for someone. Empathy is when you have a sense of, you understand the feeling that someone is going through, the experience they're going through. Miranda is able to empathise with the men on the ship. She's able to really feel for them. She feels pain for them on their behalf. She knows nothing of her past. Okay, and this is when Prospero in a minute begins to talk about his past. She was sent to an island when she was 3 years old. She used to have 4 or 5 women looking after her. She's been on the island for 12 years, and that now makes her, by calculation, about 15, believe it or not. 15 years old she is. And she's the only child of Prospero. So it's just the 2 of them on this island. She is his only child. Okay, Prospero. He has magical powers. He has looked after Miranda on his own on the island, so he has single-handedly brought his daughter up. He owns magical garments, so he has a magical cloak that he lays down in that clip. He lays it down on the ledge there on the stage when he wants to talk to Miranda without the magic interfering. He made sure nobody on the ship was harmed. He used to be the Duke of Milan, and obviously this means that he was powerful. So if he was a duke, he was incredibly powerful, and had a lot of wealth around him. So this is a very important family, really, who have been marooned on this island. So let's look at the ways Prospero and Miranda talk to each other. So Miranda to Prospero, my dearest father, certainly, sir. And then Prospero to Miranda, I have done nothing but in care of thee, my dear one. Wipe thou thine eyes, have comfort, my girl. Okay, on your piece of paper, make a really brief note on this question. So how would you describe the relationship between the father and his daughter? So just pause the slide here to make a couple of notes. This is only a brief couple of sentences, or one sentence, describing that relationship. So pause the slide here, then we'll briefly talk about a few ideas. So I would say that Miranda is talking to her father in a very respectful way, acknowledging the difference in kind of role and status between them. So my dearest father, certainly, sir. Okay, Miranda is using the word sir there to refer to her father and respond to him. It's almost like how you might speak to a teacher in school. Oh, yeah, miss, yeah, okay, yes, sir. So it's that level of respect, that marker of respect that Miranda sticks to with her father. Imagine saying that to your own parents at home. Imagine using that type of language. It might seem a bit odd to us now, but that's how it was at the time if you were of that kind of class. So Miranda, despite being on this island, still sticks to those rules, those kind of governing and appropriate ways of speaking to someone. She keeps all of those rules in place, which obviously has been taught to her by Prospero, perhaps. Perhaps he is the one who has made sure she grows up knowing these things and knows how to respond to him. In a less analytical and perhaps cynical way, this is also showing how she really respects and admires him, that she loves Prospero, she loves her father, and she wants to respond to him in the fairest way possible and the politest way possible. Prospero to Miranda, on the other hand, I've done nothing but in care of thee, my dear one. So there is a lot of love here. Wipe thou thine eyes, have comfort, my girl. So Prospero clearly cares about Miranda. He clearly has her best interests at heart. He wouldn't want to hurt her in any way deliberately. Now, there are elements in the play later on that might counteract that view, but at the moment, that's how we see Prospero and Miranda. That's how we see the relationship between them. It's full of respect and full of love as well. You might say, if we're being very analytical about this, that when he says my girl, my dear one, it's almost a bit possessive, isn't it? The pronoun there, my, it's quite possessive, and seeing her as someone that can be controlled. Now again, that's just one interpretation of that. But so on one hand, it could show that a bit of possessiveness, but also it does show this care between them and this responsibility that Prospero feels towards his daughter. He clearly feels that he wants to make her happy and give her the life she deserves. In terms of stretch and challenge, perhaps you could think here about how this differs to Aegeus and Hermia in The Midsummer Night's Dream. I won't dwell on that question too much, but if you want to come back to this or want to have a think about this now and perhaps write a couple of sentences in response to that question, you could compare the two father and daughter relationships. How was Aegeus different to Prospero, and how is Hermia perhaps different to Miranda, or how are they similar? So have a think about that if you want to think back to year 7. So next in the play, Prospero is going to tell Miranda more about their past, and there are a number of key events in his history that involve other characters we've already met. So for instance, Antonio, the current Duke of Milan, the role that was usurped by him from Prospero, Alonso, the King of Naples, and Sebastian, Alonso's brother. So on the next slide, we're just going to go through those key events before you watch the next part. Okay, so here are the key events. So Prospero was the Duke of Milan. Prospero wanted to study. To allow himself to study, Prospero gave Antonio some power to look after Milan. That was a big mistake. Antonio grew more powerful in Milan. Prospero became too concerned with his studies and didn't look after his duties as Duke of Milan. Antonio began to act as if he was the Duke of Milan. Oh dear. Antonio began making peace with Alonso, the King of Naples. Naples used to be an enemy. Antonio and Alonso planned to get rid of Prospero. So you can see how things here are going wrong. It's starting to stir against Prospero. Prospero and Miranda were put out to sea in an awful boat. Gonzalo gave Prospero some clothes, food, and the Book of Magic. So Gonzalo does help Prospero before he becomes Alonso's counsellor. So he's between the two figures here, really, Gonzalo. He's between the two men. But at the moment, obviously, he's on the side of Alonso. When they arrived on the island, Prospero began to teach Miranda. Okay, so that's the key events of Prospero and Miranda's past. So with those key events in mind, you are now going to watch the rest of the scene. And at this point, you will need your booklet out in front of you for this on page 10. So you might want to pause the slide here, make sure you've got your booklet in front of you on page 10. While you watch, or afterwards, I want you to complete the worksheet on page 10. And what you have to do is you have to highlight a quotation in the extract on the left-hand side where Prospero reveals the information that we're given on the right-hand side. So the first two have been done for you. So for instance, on the right-hand side on that sheet, number 1, underneath where it says highlight where Prospero reveals this information, number 1, Prospero was the Duke of Milan. So you have to now find in the text on the left-hand side where that is proved. So in bold there, I've emboldened, thy father was the Duke of Milan and a prince of power. And that's all you have to do. So for number 2, Prospero wanted to study. So the proof of that fact that he wants to study in the text is the liberal arts without a parallel, those being all my study. So key tip with this task is to look for keywords that are repeated. So if the keyword is used in the information on the right-hand side, on the right-hand column, look for that keyword or perhaps scan the text for that word used again on the left-hand side. That might help you a bit with this. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So you can do that while you're watching or afterwards. It doesn't really matter as long as you have highlighted or underlined the key evidence, the key quotes on the left-hand side of text in that extract. Just as long as you've done that, then you've completed that task. Okay, so you want to watch the play from 8 minutes 18 to 14 minutes 35. Okay, so stop at that moment there, and then that's it today for this lesson on our watching of the play. Okay? Let's check some answers then. So, number 1, Prospero is the Duke of Milan. That one was already done for us. Number 2, that was done for us. So let's jump in at number 3. So number 3, to allow himself time to study, Prospero gave Antonio some power to look after Milan. Now the line you should have highlighted is this one. The government I cast upon my brother, and to my state grew stranger, being transported and wrapped in secret studies. So he went off to study those secret studies, and to enable him to do that, he gave the government to his brother to look after. Risky move there from Prospero. Number 4, Antonio grew more powerful in Milan. You should have highlighted this one. So set all hearts in the state to what tune pleased his ear, that now he was the ivy which had hid my princely trunk and sucked my verdure out on it. So set all hearts in the state to what tune pleased his ear. So he's doing whatever he wants basically in Milan, whatever pleases him, that's what he's doing in Milan. Number 5, Prospero became too concerned with his studies and didn't look after his duties as Duke of Milan. You should have underlined this one. I, thus neglecting worldly ends, all dedicated to closeness and the bettering of my mind. So what he's saying there is he neglected his role, he neglected his worldly ends, his job, to the bettering of his mind, to make himself cleverer. So learning was more important to him at that time than his role as Duke. Number 6, Antonio began to act as if he was the Duke of Milan. If he did believe he was indeed the Duke out of the substitution and executing the outward face of royalty. So that's what you should have underlined for number 6. So he did believe he was indeed the Duke. So he really began to think that this was his role, that's what he was entitled to, and that Prospero was never there at all. Number 7, Antonio began making peace with Alonso, the King of Naples. Naples used to be an enemy. You should have underlined this one. So, with the King of Naples, to give him annual tribute, do him homage, subject his coronet to his crown and bend, the dukedom yet unbowed, alas, poor Milan, to most ignoble stooping. Okay, so Antonio and Alonso there are becoming friends, even though Naples and Milan used to be enemies. Antonio and Alonso planned to get rid of Prospero, and the evidence for that is, should presently extirpate me and mine out of the dukedom and confer fair Milan with all the honours of my brother. So they want to remove Prospero from Milan so they can run it for themselves. Number 9, Prospero and Miranda were put out to sea in a boat, a rotten carcass of a butt, not rigged, nor tackles, sail, nor mast. We'll look at that next lesson in more detail. Number 10, Gonzalo gave Prospero some clothes, food, and the book of magic. The evidence for this, some food we had and some fresh water that a noble Neapolitan Gonzalo, out of his clarity, did give us. He furnished me from mine own library with volumes. So Gonzalo was the one that gave Prospero the magical books from the library. So Gonzalo, as I said before, is a very interesting character, and we'll come back to him later. 11. When they arrived on the island, Prospero began to teach Miranda. So here in this island we arrived, and here have I, thy schoolmaster, made thee more profit. So Prospero there has become a schoolmaster rather than just a dad, just a father, and is teaching his daughter. Okay, so those are the key moments of Miranda and Prospero's past. So well done if you got those ones correct. If you didn't get some of these, then make sure you've underlined them now or highlighted them now, so that all of that is in there in your booklet, ready for you. Okay, well done. So this really is optional. If you would like to watch a quick video clip of Prospero and Miranda's past, then you can watch this. It's only about 2 minutes 20 seconds long, so it's not long at all. But if you do want to watch this, then make sure you click when you get to that page on episode 2. Okay, so that's optional if you wanted to go over their past. So this is our final task of this lesson, so well done for making it this far through. So these statements about Prospero's past are true. So Prospero focused on his studies. He didn't take care of his responsibilities as the Duke of Milan. Okay, so we know that those two things are true about Prospero. So in 4 sentences, I would like you to write an answer to this question. Now again, this is not a seized paragraph, it's only a quick response really, a couple of sentences, 3 sentences at most, although your teacher might ask you to write more. If they do, then obviously that's fine. But the question is this. So what do you think Prospero plans to do with Antonio? So Antonio is his brother who usurped him, who betrayed him, who exiled him on an island, believing really that he wouldn't survive. So he really sentenced him to death, and we'll look at the way he does that, the way he sends him off in a terrible boat, in kind of wanting him to die really on that journey. We'll look at that in more detail next lesson. So I would like you to answer this question. What do you think Prospero plans to do with Antonio? Please remember to use full stops, capital letters on names, and then in the blue box there is a really simple couple of sentence starters you might want to use to help you with this. So I believe that Prospero plans to. It seems likely Prospero would do this because he wants Antonio to. So think about the keywords in that keyword box also on this slide. Think about how you would feel if your brother had taken over your role and basically got rid of you. Think about how you'd feel. What would you want to do to them? How would you want them to feel knowing that you are still alive when they find that out? How would you want them to feel? What kind of things might you do? Okay, so really think about that. Really put yourself in Prospero's shoes to think about this in more detail. Okay, so that is the end of this lesson. There is a quick quiz on the next slide, so please move on to that when you've finished off this piece of writing. And also perhaps you might want to go back to some other slides for this task as well. So you might want to go back to perhaps the events of Prospero's past to really remind yourself what happened to him, what Antonio did to him, because he is a terrible brother, what he did to him, and that will help you with this. Alright then, so final task of this lesson. Well done for keeping with it and sticking with it for this long. So, place these events from Prospero and Miranda's past in the correct order. Okay, so A, Antonio began taking more power and began acting as the Duke of Milan. B, Prospero was the Duke of Milan. C, Antonio worked with an enemy, the King of Naples. D, Antonio used the forces from Naples to get rid of Prospero. E, Prospero and Miranda were sent away from Milan. One of Prospero's friends gave him food and his books to take with him. And F, Prospero gave his brother Antonio some power so that Prospero could study. Okay, so put those please into the correct order. You don't have to write out the sentences, just rearrange on your piece of paper the letters. So don't worry about copying any of the sentences out, just those letters. Alright then, so here are the answers. So it's B, F, A, C, D and E. So well done again for making it this far to the end of the lesson. Well done. I hope you've enjoyed listening along and watching the play a bit more today as well. We'll be doing a bit more close analysis next lesson, so not watching the play but looking at some key quotes and doing a bit of writing about those as well. So well done. Keep with it, you're doing so well. Hopefully you can start tomorrow's lesson or next lesson as soon as you can. Okay, hello Year 8. This is your final lesson, recorded lesson for this week. Well done for making it to the end. I hope you've enjoyed following them. If you are keeping up your school routines, then you might like to write down the date and title now on your piece of paper. Make sure you've got a pen and paper at the ready. You will not need your booklet today. You will need that next lesson, but not with this one with me. Also, if you are changing slides and you can't hear my audio automatically, then just check the speaker and make sure that's turned on and turned up. So just check those things just in case you can't hear any audio. So hopefully you are ready. Let's make a start. First of all, I would like you to look at these images of the key characters in the play so far, and I would like you to either say them to yourself or perhaps say them to someone else in the room, who these characters are. So who are these people? Say their names out loud, so either to yourself or to someone else in the room. As an extension on that, you might like to think about which characters are good and which characters are villains. So which characters are kind and which may have some unkind or perhaps evil intentions. Okay, so we've got Prospero, Miranda, Gonzalo, Sebastian, Antonio and Alonso. So at the moment, at this stage in the play, we know that Prospero and Miranda were marooned on an island. They were exiled there against their will by Antonio and Alonso. So at the moment, we do feel sympathy for Prospero and Miranda, which is why they have a green tick next to them. So at the moment, these are good characters, we believe. Sebastian, Antonio and Alonso, they have red crosses next to them. At the moment, we see them as perhaps quite villainous characters, particularly Antonio and Alonso, because they have plotted against Prospero. Antonio, Prospero's brother, usurped his position in Milan and then worked together with Alonso to get Prospero and Miranda, his daughter, removed from Milan and sent away, what they, in a way they thought would kill him. So at the moment we see them as quite villainous characters, evil characters. Gonzalo, as we've said before, is a slightly more complex character to analyse at this stage because he is obviously currently on Alonso's side, but when Prospero and Miranda were exiled, when they were taken over in a rickety boat over to this island, ready to face certain death, they thought, Gonzalo gave Prospero some books. Okay, so yesterday in our lesson when we read and we watched Prospero telling Miranda all about their past, we found out that Gonzalo wanted to help Prospero on his way. So giving him books, giving him things to take with him, that obviously we know now has helped him since he's got to the island. So he is an interesting one to think about, and at the moment he's got a green tick next to his name. Okay, so very briefly, I would now like you to write down 2 things that you remember about each of these characters. So what you might like to do is write down each character name on your piece of paper, and perhaps underneath that name write 2 bullet points, so 2 quick facts, 2 quick pieces of information about each character. So for instance, for Prospero, one of your bullet points might be that he used to be the Duke of Milan. Another one might be that he has a daughter called Miranda. Another one could be that he likes to read, that he likes to study. Okay, so you could perhaps pick 2 of those for your Prospero list. Okay, so we'll go through some ideas in just a second. So pause the slide here, make a quick couple of notes for each characters, and then we'll move on to some answers. Okay, so let's just recap the key information about these characters. I will narrate through this, but if you would like to skip the slides or skip at your own pace and just read the information, that's absolutely fine. So Prospero used to be the Duke of Milan. He has a brother called Antonio. Antonio usurped him as Duke of Milan. Prospero has a daughter called Miranda. He was helped by Gonzalo when sent away from Milan. Okay, on to Alonso. So he is the King of Naples. He has a brother called Sebastian. Gonzalo is now his counsellor, so he has moved Gonzalo from Prospero's kind of allegiance over to Alonso's. So interesting. Alonso has a son called Ferdinand, who we haven't met yet, but we will do. So he has a son called Ferdinand. Ferdinand is a very important character, so watch out for him later. And then Antonio. So he is Prospero's brother. He has worked with Alonso, King of Naples, to overthrow Prospero. He has sent Prospero and Miranda out to sea, and he then became the Duke of Milan. So Antonio at the moment is perhaps the most villainous character that we have met. Okay, so hopefully you've got some of those notes written down under each character name. You may have some different facts. If you do, that's fine, that's great. But you might want to pause here and just note down any that perhaps you were missing for those characters. So last year we studied metaphors, and you've studied this again in Sherlock Holmes as well. So when Sherlock Holmes is described as a perfect reasoning and observing machine, that is a metaphor because we are comparing Holmes to something else, a machine. So as a summary then, a metaphor is a way of describing something. It's not a literal description. You compare it to something it's not. So in our Sherlock Holmes example, we're comparing Sherlock, the character, to a machine. So a machine, a contraption that works perfectly and gives automatic and accurate responses on everything. It doesn't use emotion in its reasoning. Everything is calculated like a computer. So we're comparing Sherlock, the character, to that type of machine. The example we looked at last year was this one. So the fog comes on little cat feet. So we're comparing the fog, the weather, and its movement to a little cat walking on its feet very lightly. So think about a cat, the way it might move. We might not often hear a cat coming into the room. If you've got a cat at home, you might sometimes turn around and the cat's there looking at you because it's sneaked up very, very quietly. And that's how the fog in this metaphor is moving. So what metaphors do is it gives writers a way of describing something in a bit more detail to make it a bit more interesting for readers and give them a way of visualising how something is happening or what a character might be like. Now, Shakespeare uses metaphors all the time in his writing. His metaphors can make his plays interesting to study, but also quite difficult to read at times. Now, my top tip with Shakespeare, or any text really, is to look for the words you do know. Start there. So it's quite easy to be thrown by Shakespeare's language when you look at it in bulk, as some of you might already have experienced, because a lot of the language is quite archaic and old-fashioned. However, some of the words, a lot of the words that Shakespeare uses, we still use today. Remember that Shakespeare, those of us in my class, we've talked about this in our live lessons, that Shakespeare invented lots of pieces of language, lots of words into our modern vocabulary. A lot of the language he uses does have similar meanings to what we would attribute to that word today. So even if it looks confusing and the meaning looks confused and a bit unlike how we would normally use a certain word, think about what you do know, think about the context you would use that word in, and then go from there, because chances are you won't be far off getting it right. So here is an example of a metaphor Shakespeare uses at this part of the play. So when Prospero is describing the terrible boat he and Miranda were sent away in, he says, "They prepared a rotten carcass of a boat." So as we know, a metaphor is a way of describing something. So it's not a literal description, we are comparing something to something it's not. So, what are the two elements being compared in this metaphor? So for this, just pause the slide. You don't have to write anything down, just have a think, have a look at that quote again. What two elements are being compared in this metaphor? Okay, did you get it? I'm sure you did. So, Prospero says they prepared a rotten carcass of a boat. What he's comparing there is the boat he was sent away on to a carcass, a rotten carcass. So by comparing the boat to a carcass, Prospero shows how dangerous the boat is. So a carcass, when we think of a carcass, we might think of perhaps something dead, perhaps a dead animal, and what's left behind when that animal has died. Horrible image. So a carcass is essentially, in that sense, like a skeleton. So that then implies, in this metaphor, that the boat may not have been very large, perhaps a bit like a shell, like a carcass would be of an animal. The shell of the boat that was probably quite thin and looked like it would easily break. Okay, so in this metaphor, what Prospero is saying is that the boat wasn't fit for purpose. The boat was like a rotten carcass that was empty, fragile, that was never really going to get him to this island. Obviously, he does make it somehow, but that was not the intention. So the boat was deliberately rotten and like a carcass, not fit for purpose. Okay, so hopefully you got that correct. If not, you might want to go back perhaps and look at the previous slide, just make sure you understand what the two things are that are being compared. Well done. Here is another metaphor Prospero uses. He is describing how Antonio took more and more power away from him when he lived in Milan, and Prospero says this: "Now he was the ivy which had hid my princely trunk." So I have two questions for you. So again, you can either make note of these questions or you could just think about it in your head as you read. I don't mind what you do here. So number one, what is Prospero comparing Antonio to in this metaphor? And number two, what does this suggest about Antonio? So again, there will be some answers on the next slide. Try not to look at that just yet. Try and do it on your own first of all. So what is Prospero comparing Antonio to in this metaphor? And what does this suggest about Antonio? All right then, I love this metaphor. So hopefully you've got this. I've coloured the words in purple and blue to show you the difference. So now he was the ivy which had hid my princely trunk. So he there is Antonio, and Prospero is comparing Antonio to ivy. Now this is ivy. There's an image there, not the name, the plant. It grows very quickly and covers the surface it grows on, and some types of ivy, as some of us might know, are very poisonous. So imagine, if you know what ivy looks like, perhaps you might have some in your garden, perhaps not poison ivy, but you know what I mean. You might have that type of plant perhaps outside. You'll notice that it grows very quickly and it's very intrusive, so it grows everywhere, into the cracks of the walls. You know, if you didn't stop ivy growing, it would go everywhere. So it's the kind of plant that permeates everything. It travels along everything and gets in the way, and it kind of covers things as well. So this metaphor suggests that Antonio, a bit like ivy, is hard to control and quickly consumes and takes over others. So in this sense, really, what the audience, what Prospero is talking about, is his own role as Duke of Milan. So a bit like ivy, growing ivy, Antonio has taken over his role. He's usurped his role, moved him out of the way. Also ivy, if any of you have any experience of this, ivy is very hard to cut down. It takes a long time to get ivy away from a wall. So Prospero might also be saying here that bringing down Antonio, getting his role back as Duke of Milan, will be quite difficult to achieve because of how strong and how calculating Antonio is, a bit like ivy. The idea here of the princely trunk, think about a tree trunk and how perhaps ivy or plants might grow up on that trunk. It's almost like Prospero is seeing himself as this tree that is caught in the ivy, caught in Antonio's web of lies and deception and scheming. So an excellent metaphor there. So this is the final metaphor we're going to look at today. So Miranda says that she must have been a great trouble to Prospero when they were sent away. Obviously, remember that Miranda was only 3 years old when she was sent away to this island, so she was very, very young. So think about what that might have been like for a 3-year-old to go away. And also think about how that might have been for Prospero, her father. So Prospero replies like this. Oh, a cherubim, thou wast that did preserve me. Okay, so question 1, again you might like to write these ideas down or just think about them. So number 1, what is a cherubim? Think about that. Number 2, what does this tell us about Miranda's impact on Prospero's life? So think there for number 2 about this line, thou wast that did preserve me. So what does preserve mean? So think about those words please for this. Again, there are answers on the next slide, but see if you can do this on your own first of all, before you look at those answers. So, oh, a cherubim, thou wast that did preserve me. So what does Prospero mean by that metaphor? What is he comparing Miranda to? Well, he's comparing Miranda to a cherubim. Now, a cherubim is known as a guardian angel. So that image there is what we often associate with a cherubim. It's usually represented in art as a beautiful child with small wings. So this metaphor then, this comparison suggests that Miranda helped Prospero through his ordeal. So she was an angel, a guardian angel to him when they arrived on the island. And it implies that word preserve there. Preserve means to keep things going, to keep things as they are. That without Miranda, he perhaps wouldn't have survived. He perhaps wouldn't have been able to keep going on that island. And that actually Miranda, like a beautiful angel, a guardian angel, was looking after him. Even though really it would have been the other way around. He is the adult and she was only 3 years old. But she was the reason that he had to keep going. And she was the reason that he wanted to survive, teach her, teach himself, live on the island, and hopefully form a plan to get away. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. But it might be something, the cherubim idea might be something you might want to research further. So you might want to Google perhaps cherubims in pieces of artwork because they are everywhere, particularly in Renaissance pieces. So you might want to have a look at that online if you have a bit of spare time perhaps for this lesson. Okay, well done. Your final piece of writing then this week is a C's paragraph. Now I don't want anyone to worry about this at home, it's just really a chance for you to practice this skill and keep it ticking over at home. So your question is this: how does Shakespeare use metaphor to show Prospero's past treatment? Okay, so all of the quotes, well, 2 really of the 3 quotes we've just looked at, the metaphors we've just looked at, will be perfect to answer this question. And I'm only asking you to write 1 paragraph. Your teachers might ask you to write more, or they might ask you not to look at this task. That's up to them, obviously, so make sure you listen to what they are asking you to do, perhaps in your live lessons. But let's just go through an example paragraph before you write your own, so you know what to do. Okay, so remember that C's, it's statement, evidence, inference, zoom in, and effect on the audience. So that is the C structure as a little recap for us. It's really important that when you're writing about Shakespeare, that you remember that Shakespeare is writing a play. So The Tempest is a play, so it's not a book, it's not a novella, it's a play. So when we are referring to the effect on the reader, when it comes to Shakespeare, we need to talk about the effect on the audience. Because when a play is to be performed in front of an audience, and an audience like us, we watch it. So we're not reading it, we're not readers, we're viewing it, we're an audience. So when you are writing your C's paragraph for this, you must refer to the effect on the audience rather than the effect on the reader. Okay, really small point there, but really important that you know that the form of this text is a play rather than a book. So let's go through an example answer, a model answer for this question. It's really important that when you write any paragraph or any piece of writing really, that when you look at an example like this, you always look at the different parts of it and look at how they are fitting together. Okay, so we'll go through that together now. So the question, how does Shakespeare use metaphor to show Prospero's past treatment? In Act 1, Scene 2, Prospero explains to Miranda that he experienced deliberate betrayal in his past. This is shown in the play when Prospero says that Antonio prepared Prospero and Miranda with a rotten carcass of a boat. By comparing the boat to a carcass, Prospero shows how dangerous the boat is. A carcass is like a skeleton, so the boat would not have been very large, and the shell of the boat was probably very thin, breaking easily. This emphasises how precarious the boat was. Also, the adjective rotten makes the audience think of something that is wearing away, a dead animal perhaps. This idea of death suggests that the boat was going to kill Prospero. The audience is left to question how much Antonio can be trusted and perhaps feel sympathy for Prospero. Okay, so this paragraph here follows that C structure, and we're just going to talk through why it's a good answer. So, first of all, that statement sentence there in red, it's very short and it answers the question in a nutshell. So how does the metaphor show Prospero's treatment? Well, it shows that he experienced a deliberate betrayal in his past, that he deliberately was given a terrible boat that was never, well, ideally, not going to get him safely to the island. Okay, so nice and short there, answers that question really quickly. Evidence in blue, so a quote from the play. So you must, in your paragraphs, must use a quote. Okay, so you can either write about this metaphor, the rotten carcass metaphor, or you could write about the ivy metaphor. So we'll go through that in a second. Next, inference. So in your inference, you have to explain what this tells us about his treatment. So you always link it back to the question. So in this case, obviously, it's about Prospero's past treatment, and I've put in here in my example that it shows us that his boat was precarious, it was deliberately uneasy, deliberately thin and breaking easily. So all I've done there is I've explained what that quote tells us about his experiences and what happened to him and what perhaps was intended to happen to him. Okay, next. So I'll zoom in. So this is where we build in a bit more detail. We look at a keyword or a technique and we think, right, what more does this tell us? What more do we learn about Prospero's past from this keyword in particular? So I've picked on the word rotten, and to show that I know my stuff, I've used a word class. So I've said that this is an adjective. The adjective rotten makes the audience think. And then what I've added in is I've talked about the idea of it wearing away and thinking about the idea that it's rotten, that it's perhaps it's some kind of animal that's kind of disintegrating, that horrible image. But that's what the boat is meant to look like. That's what we're meant to think as an audience. I've also talked here about the idea that links to death, and perhaps this foreshadows the death that Antonio wanted Prospero to suffer, perhaps. I haven't used the word foreshadow there, but if you wanted to be really impressive, you could use that word foreshadow when an idea links to something that happens later on in the play. Okay, and then finally, the effect on the audience. So what does Shakespeare want us to feel? So the audience is left to question how much Antonio can be trusted and how much sympathy we should now feel for Prospero. Okay, so look at how I've used the word audience there. I've used the word audience twice in this response, and I've also made sure I've used the word play in my evidence line as well. Notice here that I haven't used context. That's fine, you don't have to use context just yet. We will do that a bit later on as we read through the Tempest. So at the moment, don't worry about that too much. So yeah, we'll come back to that later on. But hopefully that's a nice clear answer for you to have a look at before you write your own. Okay, so feel free to pause your slide here if you want to read this again in your own time, that's fine. But when you want to move on, you can move straight on to writing your own answer to this question. Over to you then. So, impress me. How does Shakespeare use metaphor to show Prospero's past treatment? Now, the quote that I'd recommend you use for this is the metaphor about ivy. So when Prospero says that Antonio was the ivy which hid my princely trunk. Okay, that's the one I'd recommend you use. If you wanted to look at the one about Miranda being a cherubim, that is slightly harder to link to the question. You could manage it because you could say that Prospero's past treatment was so bad that he viewed Miranda as a cherubim, as a guardian angel. That would be a harder quote to link, but you could do that if you wanted to, if that quote interests you. However, the easier one to use, the easier metaphor to look at for this question is this one about Antonio being like ivy. So, to help you with this, I've just written down some sentence starters. Again, I would recommend you use this as a very light guide. So try and use your own words for this. Only come back to the writing frame if you really think you need it. But the more that you try and memorise this writing frame, this type of paragraph, the better you'll be. So if you wanted to perhaps cover this for the time being, cover up the writing frame for the first few lines, the first half of your paragraph, then you could try and test yourself. But that's there if you want to use it. Some key words that I want you to think about. You won't use all of these perhaps, but you might use some of them. So deliberate, calculated. So calculated is when something has been planned from the start. So how does that link to Antonio and the boat? Enveloping. So enveloping when something is covering something else. So the ivy was enveloping the setting, enveloping the wall. Antonio enveloped Prospero's position as Duke of Milan. I've just realised there that I talked about calculated in relation to the boat metaphor. You could still use calculated in terms of the ivy metaphor. You could still use it because Antonio is quite a calculating individual in the way he plans Prospero's removal from the island and plans his kind of usurping of his role. Poisonous, obviously, think about the ivy and think about Antonio's personality, and cruel. Okay, so you can use all of this to help you. You can also go back to the previous slide where we unpicked the ivy metaphor. You can go back to those notes to help you with this as well. That might be useful for your inference and your zoom in part. But now this is over to you. So again, your teacher might ask you to send this to them via email or on Show My Homework for feedback, or they might not. So make sure you listen to them and hear what they would like you to do with this, okay? But really, it's about a chance for you to practice those writing skills because I know it's been a bit of time since we've looked at that. Okay, good luck. Well done, you finished that Sue's paragraph, fabulous. So now you have finished that piece of writing, I would like you to do these for mastery checks. So make sure there are no run-on sentences, so make sure you've got punctuation, full stops, commas where you need them. Does each proper noun begin with a capital letter? So does each name that you have used begin with a capital letter? Has Prospero got a capital P? Does Antonio have a capital A? So a proper noun is a name. Have you used pronouns clearly and accurately when writing about two men? So if you are writing about Antonio and Prospero, make sure that you are not just using he all the time, otherwise we might not know who he is referring to. So make sure you're using pronouns and names at the right times. And then spellings. So if you've used any of the key words that I've given you, are those spelled correctly? Go back and check them now and make sure they are, please. Okay? It also would be good for you now to also check that you've used a quote. So perhaps circle the quote you've used, the evidence you've used. And then after that, you can stop. But make sure that you keep following this lesson because I've got one more task for you. So you have made it to the end of the week. Well done. So the final task is to complete the quiz on Show My Homework. And this quiz is all about the context of the Tempest and its genre. So this is what you worked on last week with Mrs. Calloway. So it'll be interesting to see how much of it we have remembered. Please though, do this only after you have completed this lesson. So if you're looking through my lessons, my slides at the start of the week, and you haven't completed any of the tasks yet, and you've got to this, don't just do the quiz now. Please make sure that you go through all of this lesson, these 3 lessons first, and then do this at the end, okay? So your teachers will be looking at these quiz results, they will be looking at the scores you have achieved, so make sure you do your absolute best and really concentrate on this quiz, okay? Well done. So the rest of this lesson now is a quick mastery quiz, and then I will look at some stretch and challenge tasks with some of you who would like to look at that as well. Well, here is a question for you. How long have Prospero and Miranda been on their island? Okay, is it A, 12 months, B, 7 years, C, 15 years, D, 12 years, or E, 6 days? What do you think? Okay, hopefully you got this one correct. Well done if you have. It is 12 years. So they have been on the island, Prospero and Miranda, for 12 long, very long years. So well done if you got that one correct. Well done. Okay, so that is the end of this lesson. Well done for making it to the end of this week's Tempest lessons. On the next 2 slides, there are some stretch and challenge extension tasks. So if you want to hang on for those and look at something extra, then you can do. However, if you want to stop there, then that's absolutely fine. I really hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and well done you're doing so well keeping up with your learning at home, and I hope you continue to enjoy the Tempest. So well done. So hello all you stretch and challengers. I have 2 tasks for you today that you might want to have a think about. You don't have to do both. You can just look at one if you want to. That's absolutely fine. So the first one is all about a desert island, so island life. And Prospero says that Gonzalo gave him some books to travel away with, knowing I loved my books, Prospero says. So my question to you, if you had to choose 5 possessions to take with you to a desert island, what would they be? So they must be portable and either useful or of personal value. So if you had to choose 5 possessions, what would they be? Perhaps write them down and perhaps also give a reason why you have chosen those items. Okay, have a little think about that one. Okay, my second stretch and challenge, or more like an extension task really, that I want you perhaps to think about, is a bit of creativity. So Prospero and Miranda land on a remote island. Exactly what that island is like is open to all sorts of interpretation, and it's been thought of by many different directors in the past in very different ways, from tropical paradise islands to perhaps an Arctic wasteland. It's been done in many ways in the past. So we're not given too much description of the island by Shakespeare, so it's down to us really to have a think about it ourselves. So I would like you to draw or build your own interpretation of Prospero's island. Okay, so last year's year 8s, I set this as homework actually, and some of my students actually baked an island. They made a shortbread biscuit island and then covered it with icing. So icing to represent the sea and some greenery to represent the land. So that was fabulous. Obviously you don't have to go that far at home, but that's how creative you can be with this. So you could do an illustration, you could do a drawing, a painting, perhaps you could do some baking, it's up to you. Perhaps the people at home with you in your house, your family, might love it if you do some baking, or not. Perhaps depends on your level of baking capabilities and your talents in the kitchen. But that's something you can do perhaps for a bit of fun this week if you have a bit of extra time or would like to have a go at this. Okay? So again, well done those people who are still with me listening along. You've done fabulously this week, so keep it up.